Good evening. Ooh, loud mics tonight. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, and we are back in the Freeport High School cafeteria. Hopefully this bodes well for the live stream this evening. Apologize for our technical difficulties in our last board meeting, but we're back at the high school with better Wi-Fi, so hopefully all goes smoothly this evening. We have everyone here for the board tonight. We have our newest elected student rep, Brady Grogan. Welcome, Brady. Congratulations on your landslide victory. And we'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, so I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the September 23rd meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions. Susanna, second. Jeremy, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? None opposed or opposed? I guess I didn't see Brady's hand go up. So you are allowed to vote. Yep, you can vote. We encourage you to vote. We want everyone to vote. Okay, perfect. So adjustments to the agenda?
None.
None, perfect. Good news and recognition. So we're gonna throw Brady right in here and start with our report from the student rep.
First, I would like to thank everyone for welcoming me into this position. I'm very happy to be here. As some may know, the FHS golf team recently became Class B state champions. Our soccer and field hockey teams have come off to good starts this season. Field hockey is actually playing on the turf right now. Due to restrictions, all FHS sports games are live streamed on the RSU 5 YouTube channel for anyone who ever wants to watch them. The FHA's play will premiere next Friday night, the 23rd at 7 p.m., and the Interacts Club is hosting a clothing drive until the end of October for the homeless in Portland. Any donations can be brought to the FHS lobby. For additional info, contact Dee Dee Bunnell.
Great, thank you. I think I just noticed your mask says vote on it, doesn't it? Perfect. I love it. Okay, so we were supposed to be at Mass Landing this evening, but we are still going to have our good news from Mass Landing School, Principal Emily Grimm.
Good evening. The setup is a little bit different. So when I was thinking about what good news to share in this unique circumstance, I kind of came back to this place of thinking about our collective pride at Mass Landing, about preserving the things that we were so proud of before through the unique circumstances of this last year. So we like to think of ourselves as a joyful environment for kids. Our kids' joy, we think, is kind of a reflection of what we do, and we've worked hard to continue to have those experiences that we think create joy for kids. So some of the things that have happened in the last year or continue to happen that have helped facilitate this. One, our students are outside more than they have ever been. Yesterday, you may recall the pouring rain. Our PE classes were still outside hiking in all of it. All our recesses still outside. So we're thrilled that kids are getting outside and in the woods more than ever. Our civil rights team and student councils are just starting, and we've been creative with how we schedule those opportunities so kids can still have access to those and preserve all the social distancing and other requirements we're trying to meet. Our 5th grade pre-band has started, which is focusing on percussion, using boom whackers and bells and xylophones. I actually had the chance to play Star Wars with the boom whackers on Friday, and it was pretty incredible. So kids are still having that access to build their music education. In the spring, we had a virtual choir, which a 4th grade student did the virtual arrangement and all the vocal arrangement for our virtual choir, which was a first for us with social distancing. And we were also able to keep our library circulating books, which the Freeport Community Library was closed, but the Mass Landing School Library was open through the school closure, and we circulated 1,328 books during the March, April, May, June school closure. And then starting next Friday, our students, we have seasonal festivals, so Fall Fest, Spring Fest, etc. And we are having our Fall Fest next Friday and the Friday after for our A and B cohorts, which is an opportunity for kids to engage in all sorts of fun fall activities, and is often what students note as one of their favorite things of the year. So again, it's taken some creativity to think about how that looks, but we're excited that we've been able to do it. Another piece of our work that really began pre-school closure last year that's a point of pride for us was the work we've done around our classroom libraries and making sure that our classroom libraries really are both a reflection of the students in our classroom, but that those libraries also give kids a window into the world and a door into other people's experiences. And so we worked hard last fall to weed our classroom libraries, to pull some of those texts like Little House on the Prairie that some of us might have held near and dear to our experiences as readers in elementary school ourselves, but to be kind of have a more critical lens about what we're providing access to, and then also trying to pull in newer titles that we're not only having in our libraries, but reading ourselves as educators and then talking up with kids. And so we're proud of when you have the chance to come into Mass Landing. I think you may be there tomorrow. I think I heard from Dennis. If you get a chance to see classrooms, I'd encourage you to kind of pay attention to our book displays and what you see on shelves, and would love your feedback about what you see about that. And then the biggest piece to me that's good news is I think at the end of the day, schools are learning organizations. That's what we specialize in, and to me the last 6 months or so feels like this great opportunity to really specialize in being a learning organization and to get better and better at modeling the type of learning we expect of our kids. So I just feel like it's necessary to kind of give praise to our teachers and our staff who have worked so hard, not only to learn how to teach remotely, but now learn how to teach in a hybrid environment, and not only learn how to do that, but continue to think about how we do that better. We had the opportunity just 2 weeks to think about how to do that better when some kids were out on quarantine. And then also just our students and families who have kind of come into this experience with that learning orientation and continuing to use it as an opportunity for reflection. I got an email from a parent about 2 weeks ago that just to me captured it so much. And she said, Emily, like, this is all about adaptation, and that's where learning comes from, is adaptation. And so changes happen, and this is a great way to just frame that as an opportunity for learning for kids. And to me, that's the grand news of the year, is that we've been able to use changes that maybe we wouldn't have chosen as an opportunity to continue to look at our own practice. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with our goals when I talk with you later.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so we are on to our first public comment of the evening. We have two avenues for public comment. If you're here in person, which, unless they're hiding, I don't see any public to comment here in person. But also, if you are joining us via the Zoom, we have the ability to include you in the conversation. If you can simply raise your hand in the Zoom. We have our wonderful vice chair here who's watching the Zoom to see if we have any folks online that want to share. And if you're calling in from your phone, it's to unmute yourself is
*9.
*9, perfect. But if you just put your hand up, if you're on your computer, she can unmute you. If you're on your phone, you'll just unmute yourself as *9. So do we have anybody?
We do. Andrew? Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So hi, I'm Andrew Morrissey. I'm a junior at Freeport High School. I'm in the class with an AP Lang with Ms. Levitt, and I wrote this letter to you guys, and here I will speak it for you. So I'll get right into it. Dear members of the RSU 5 School Board. Oh, and sorry, this is an argument for the yellow plan, for the red, green, and yellow. So, dear members of the RSU 5 School Board, the RSU 5 district should continue with the yellow plan because it is safe and effective. It provides the best education for students while minimizing risk for spreading COVID-19. While a red plan would be the safest plan with the least risk for spreading the disease, I believe the yellow plan offers an acceptable amount of risk with much worthwhile benefit. For many, the red plan is not an option. The red plan will leave many parents with no available care for their children during the day. Also, a great portion of kids don't have the work ethic to learn effectively on a red plan. Even a lot of my personal friends, while normally having good work ethic, fell way behind in multiple classes. While red is safe from a health perspective, it is dangerous to the education of our next generation. Considering the flip side of the coin, going green is reckless, irresponsible, and infeasible. I know teachers are already trepidatious in the yellow plan. I have personally heard teachers express fear for their safety in the classroom. The green plan will put teachers at an even higher risk due to twice the amount of breathing bodies in the room in school. Faculty with underlying health conditions or justifiably cautious individuals could be driven to teach from home like many already have. I've heard from students how difficult it is to get anything out of an in-school class being taught by a teacher at home. The green plan will also punch a hole in our budget. People will need to be paid to sit in these virtual teacher classrooms and hand out papers. People would need to be paid to clean longer and more often. People would need to be paid for the extra supplies we need to keep us safe. While I don't know how you manage your budget and how we might get this money, I know these facts don't bring a smile to your face. There are many reasons to continue the yellow plan, but one you may not have considered is that it gets families out of the house and into our towns. This stimulates the local economy and helps our local businesses survive. Even us kids help support the local economy when we're at FHS buying Starbucks or coffee by design. We all know how over the past couple years, Freeport has steadily been losing more and more storefronts, and we need to do anything we can to help them or else face a bleak ghost town. The yellow plan is the best balance between risk and reward. We don't want to be the ones on TV for a failed risky plan, and I know for a fact none of us want our students to be disadvantaged. The yellow plan is the best plan for Freeport, Durham, and Pownell families and for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope your teacher was listening. I assume that was a project. It was fantastic. Okay, so I think that was all we had. We'll give folks just a second if they're still trying to find the raise hand function on Zoom. But there is another public comment opportunity at the end of our agenda if someone is so inclined. Still no? Okay, so we will move on with, we do not have a report from the superintendent, but, before we go, yeah, sure. We do have one more public comment.
Jeff, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jeff Gearberg. I'm a teacher at Freeport High School. And it was really great to hear Andrew talking there, and it's great to see Brady. So I guess what I'd like to share is that I know you guys are going to be discussing the green plan and the feasibility of moving in that direction. And I think, you know, from my perspective, when I look at those plans, whether it's red, green, or yellow, they you know, on paper, they all seem reasonable. The reality in the classroom, though, is really different. The reality in the hallways is really different. And they don't necessarily work the way that you think they were going to work. And I hope that as you folks think about the decision that you're going to make, I don't know if you guys have been in the buildings and like shadowed kids and see what a day is like for them, but you know, whatever it is that you're going to decide, I hope that you're not basing the decision solely on what these plans look like on paper, but rather what the reality is in the classroom with moving, breathing human beings, not necessarily doing what the plan on paper says they should be doing. So I guess that's what I would like to share. And I would just end that I'm super happy to be back in the building with kids. Last spring was just no fun. School without kids is no fun. And I am hoping that we can stay in school with kids as long as, you know, all year long. That's my hope. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for allowing the public comment.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jamie Palmer.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can.
Hi, this is Jamie Palmer. I teach at Moore Street. I just want to speak on behalf of my colleagues when I say thank you to all of our administrators who have been working so hard through this. This isn't easy on anybody, students, parents, staff. But I would like to recognize in particular Julie Nickerson, who has been nothing but supportive to her staff and helping lead us in a really positive direction for our staff and our children. I'd also like to echo that it's so wonderful to be back with our children. We all love it here. So thank you to everybody for all you do and for listening and just all your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay. So we will move on from public comment to the Mass Landing School Goal Review. Emily got a chance to have a quick break, and back up she comes.
So I'm going to talk in 3 buckets just so I'm not talking for 15 minutes without pausing. So I'll start with kind of framing the academic work we focused on last year, as well as the implications for our work in the coming year. Just to give you a little bit of context, last year we focused our learning in a couple of areas. The first was on ensuring that the additional collaborative time that we had as a staff could be used in ways that were instructionally valuable, and specifically focusing on unpacking units. That's like a fancy way of just saying looking at the whole before we're looking at the discrete parts. So where is the unit going, which helps teachers make important decisions that are super important actually right now in yellow about what they keep and what can kind of get pushed aside. So we allocated more time for that work last year than we had in the past. We also focused on learning in content areas in a couple areas. One was deepening our collective understanding within reading comprehension, specifically looking at interpretive and analytical comprehension for kids. So this is going beyond the literal, beyond kind of what happened in the story or what's the setting, more to thinking around what's the theme, what was the writer's purpose in writing this, what kind of craft moves did an author make, and pushing kids into that deeper level thinking that we think is so important for them as readers. The other piece you may recall from last year was focusing on also growing our discourse or opportunities for dialogue in our math classrooms. So kids making sense of their own thinking, talking with other kids about their thinking, looking at multiple strategies, and ways teachers can facilitate that conversation in the classroom. So those were our 2 academic areas of focus. And we really looked at a model last year that where each grade level focused primarily on one content area. And I know I got some questions a year ago about that decision. And here we are a year later in this unique circumstance where we got very positive feedback from teachers about that model. People felt like they had more ability to get traction when each professional learning day came back and built upon the previous. Rather than, you can imagine the challenge of like having some new math learning and then 2 weeks later having learning about reading, and the challenge of like what does implementation look like. So the good news is the feedback was positive. The challenge is this year is going to look a little bit different. So we had, about 6 months ago when we were starting the conversations around the professional learning model for this year, anticipated keeping the same model. For this year, our focus is going to look a little bit different, because the main work, and you'll see this in our goals this year, is thinking around what it means to teach in yellow, and what does it mean to think of a unit and having kids in person for 2 or 3 days and at home for 2 or 3 days each week. And so that kind of collaborative unpacking work that we prioritized last year will continue to be prioritized. In fact, it's never felt more relevant, honestly, than it has for the last 6 weeks to have that time. But as a result, we won't be focusing our primary learning in one content area, but really looking about how we unpack all of the content areas. And it's been actually, interestingly, this great opportunity, even for our most veteran teachers, to revisit content that they may not have approached with that lens, because they've been teaching it several times. So this year's work, like I said, will continue to focus on that unit unpacking and all the content areas. The other shift we're making is after in literacy focusing on reading for 3 years, shifting our focus to writing, which feels like a timely transition. And interestingly, it feels like the foundation of understanding we've built in reading is helping us have a deeper understanding of how reading and writing are reciprocal and how they can support one another. For example, I was at a writing class recently and students were developing characters for fiction stories they were writing, and the teacher was referring to the reading lesson and how they were using a mentor text or an example text to think about like a character being authentic. So understanding like how this reading lesson that I'm teaching at 9 o'clock really supports the writing that students are doing at 11 and vice versa. And then the other work that will be a continuation of last year is one thing we had put a little bit more time into was doing individual case study work. And this is kind of when you have a student that you can't quite crack, so to speak, and it could be behaviorally, it could be academically, and it's a process that we collaboratively developed a protocol and then tried it and then made some refinements to it so a teacher can bring a student to his or her team and say like, I need some help here. This is what I've tried. Let's look at what the student's actually doing so that we can start with that student's strengths and how we build upon them. But it's a way to problem solve our students who were not seeing the movement that we'd hope to see. And so we'll continue to preserve time for that work this year. You'll see that the goals are based, as we typically do, around both looking at growth, this idea that we always want to push kids get a year's worth of growth no matter what their starting point is, but then also ultimately looking at proficiency. We feel like it's helpful to always look at those two metrics, especially this year when we have some kids who are coming in not quite in the place that they might in a typical year, but still continuing to focus on if they're starting here, how do we make sure they still have a year's worth of growth? So that's kind of a high level overview of our academic focus. Any questions about that before I shift a bit to our behavioral support?
Molly.
Thank you, Emily. My question is, since spring was so different from what we'd expected it to be, and there was a lot of learning lost in the spring for obvious reasons, how are you addressing the unpacking of the work that the students should have done last year? Because I do get messages from teachers that basically referencing that some kids are trying to catch up. Yep. And I don't quite understand how they are catching up, because some students are moving with the concepts that they should be learning this year, and others are trying to learn the ones that they should have learned last year.
Yep. So there are a couple layers to that question. I think the first thing to keep in mind is every year, any classroom you walk into is going to have kids, like typically in a 3-year grade span, right? Every classroom has kids that are typically a year or two behind. Every classroom has kids that are reaching into the standards at the grade above. So the good news is that challenge is not a brand new challenge for our teachers. The circumstances though are unique. So I think there are a couple things. One is we're doing more vertical planning. So for example, on Friday, when we unpacked our next math unit, our next writing unit, teachers 3rd, 4th, and 5th are all in the same room and had opportunities to talk about, like, in writing, okay, what does a skill look like as a 3rd grader? What does it look like for 4th? What does it look like for 5th? So teachers know how it will continue to be taught and how it was taught or wasn't in the spring. Just so some of those conversations are happening and teachers are aware and then able to say, you know, a 4th grade team be like, oh, that's so essential for the unit they're gonna do next year. Make sure that you focus on that. Or you know what, like they're gonna do a lot of work on leads coming up. Like don't worry about continuing to prioritize that in your teaching. So some of it is creating those opportunities for vertical conversation, and Thursday and Friday were so valuable and timely in that regard. The other piece is, or two that are connected, is taking advantage of our relatively small class sizes right now. You know, so one teacher commented to me like, this is like the dream for having that span, because you can hit, you know, once you do your direct instruction, then kids are off in groups. You can truly meet with every student or small groups in the period versus when you have 18 or 20 kids and you're not gonna hit every kid every day. The other piece with that is thinking around how we're using at-home practice. And that's a piece I'll say, like, that feels like one of the big areas for learning. I hope that, you know, parents think we're better at it today than we were the first week of September. I also anticipate in 6 weeks we'll be better at it than we are today. And some of that is thinking, so students at-home practice, how can we be like just on the and a cusp of what's going to push a student, but they can also do to some degree with independence. And teachers planning around how like that at-home work might look different for different kids to fill the buckets. And we see this, I'll be honest, math has been a bigger crux. Like the data from math is less positive than it is for reading. And writing. I think there are a lot of hypotheses about why that is. But teachers using that, if they're teaching, like right now, the pacing guide, by and large, is they're teaching a lesson, and then they have the at-home day to support that lesson. It's not like they're doing a 2-for-1. They're not teaching 2 lessons in a single 2-day cycle. And so teachers spent some time last week and are continuing to do that in teams, thinking around what practice, what gameplay, what fluency work are students doing at that at-home day to recognize that for some kids we're trying to retroactively fill some things that were missed in the spring. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And just one quick follow-up. When are you going to get the results, the NEWAs that they took a couple of weeks ago, and will that help you assess where each student is at and how to address their learning gaps?
Yep. So we have our last makeup session tomorrow morning. So I have almost full data sets. I'll say, in our first administration, we've got about 3/4 of kids finished. And Lisa and I were actually, I'm going to call out Lisa because we were having this conversation earlier today. My gut, I haven't calculated the data, Lisa has, is that we have more students. If a student was at the 60th percentile, typically we saw most kids stay at the same percentile or increase. Meaning, like, if they're 60th percent last year, 60% this year, that means essentially they met their growth target. I'm seeing more kids this year that might have been at 60th last year, and now we're at like 54th, right? And I haven't pulled the precise number, and I think the question that really intrigues me, and I think this in reading too, is at what extent, keep in mind, some of the assessments we did kids' first week of school, right? They're reading assessments. Which kids are we going to see real movement with when they've been back in school for 2 months, right? Because kids had a 6-month absence from regular classroom instruction, and which kids need something more. So part of it is like our intervention services are in place. Those are during students' at-home days, so we're not pulling kids from instruction in the classroom for instruction. But I almost have a full set. I can't calculate the total numbers just because of those remaining kids that need to finish testing.
Sorry, I'm just going to, because we got a little bit of feedback about when, particularly with everybody in masks, they can't really tell who's talking because it's kind of the videos from far away. So I just wanted to make sure I said into the mic who was speaking. So Susanna.
Thank you, Emily. Just a quick question on clarification question. You had said that in the previous 3 years, if I understand you correctly, that teachers were focusing on reading and now moving into writing. I'm just wondering, is that teaching as it affects curriculum, or is that sort of how teachers are approaching the subject?
So for the last 3 years, teachers, well, last year we focused by grade level on either math or reading. The previous 2 years, we had both a math focus and a literacy focus, and the literacy focus was for those 2 previous years was on reading. And it was really on deepening our understanding both of the units of study, so our curricular model, but also the progression of student understanding and the complexity of reading comprehension. So the examples I used, specifically looking last year, we're thinking around how are we hitting on all the elements of comprehension we really expect students to have, or do we tend kind of to fall to the literal? It's what's like more accessible, and looking at the practice specifically of interactive read aloud. So that's when a teacher's reading aloud, but providing both thinking, like modeling their own thinking, as well as pulling kids into that thinking. Kids are doing turn-in talks, kids might be jotting, and it's the teacher's way to see students putting those skills into action. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. I was just really wondering what the effects on curriculum are. So, but you've touched on that, I think so. Thank you.
All right, so the second piece really, to me, focuses kind of more on school culture, and it largely includes kind of some of the changes we've made within RTIB, but to me is bigger than that. So if we think of kind of tier 1, that's universal instruction, what hits all students. Last year we focused in a couple areas. The first was we have school values, things like be respectful, be fair, have fun, do your best. But we spent time articulating definitions for each of those and focusing on ways we integrate that language more fully into the way that we reinforce students' behavior and redirect them, which is part of the responsive classroom framework we use. And so that was our whole school focus. Last year was an exciting year for us because we had a new, when we think about the kids who struggle to be successful and need a little bit more, we had an RTIB ed tech for the first time, which was an amazing addition to our ability, particularly to be proactive. So for example, if we knew a student consistently had trouble transitioning from recess into math class every day, rather than that student struggling every day, coming up to see me, losing time in math, right? We could have a staff who then grabs that student 2 or 3 minutes before the end of recess. They have a plan for what that transition looks like. And then that student is ready to go at the start of math. And so that enabled us not only to help preserve students' time and access of academics, but also to build skill. And that's really what that position is there to do, to focus either on emotional regulation or task initiation. And that was a really valuable addition to our work and collaboration with the social worker. We also created a sensory space, which some students used as part of their proactive plans in consultation with our occupational therapist. And because we had that ed tech, we were also able to collect better data for students. And that, it served us in a couple ways. One, we could look at if what we're doing is working. So theoretically, if you're building skill, a student needs less support. So you can revisit the plan, modify the plan, and then you can also, sometimes you notice what you're doing is not working, you modify the plan, it's still not working. And then we were able to have a really solid data set if we were looking at something like a referral to special education, that we felt like we had clear data to document concerns. This year, our work will continue with the structures we have in place. We are putting in more, we have a new school counselor and have already started a more comprehensive school counseling curriculum for all grades. So that's kind of at the tier 1 level, ensuring that we're teaching into some of those skills we want all students to have. And then our social worker and RTIB ed tech, which we just started having staffed this week, are working on that proactive piece for kids who need a little bit more to support their learning. We piloted our screener as well, which is a way of looking at externalizing and internalizing behaviors in the school, basically to make sure you're not missing any kids, especially those internalizing kids, right? The externalizers usually are easier to notice because their behavior is big. And so last year we did the screener in the fall and then did not have a chance to come back to it in the spring because kids weren't in the building, but we'll be again using it this fall just to make sure that we're best prioritizing where our resources go, and then use that data again in the spring. Any questions about that piece?
Thank you.
And then the last piece will sound really similar, I'm sure, to Julie's presentation, because she and I have collaborated on the work around supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in our school environment. So I'll be succinct with this only because I know she's spoken to it, but we are both enrolled and engaging in the Maine Cultural Competence Institute and have formed a team across both schools. We had our first meeting last week, and we see this team's role both as kind of lead learners of this work. It's individuals who have all taken it upon themselves through the summer to do some individual learning. We're sharing resources with one another, and then thinking through what will be most valuable to share whole staff. That team will also use the audit findings to develop an action plan on implications for our own building. And then the other piece of that work is leaning on the existing frameworks we have that very much support these goals, which are both Teachers College, where our curriculum materials come out of, is doing a lot of work around this topic. They're what we were leaning to for our classroom library work when that began a year plus ago, and then also the Center for Responsive Schools, which you might know as Responsive Classroom, again, is a great framework for thinking about community and access and equity. So we'll continue to lean on those frameworks that are already in place at our school for building this work as well. Any questions?
All right, you answered them all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we don't have any committee reports this evening, so we will move on to policy review. Consideration and approval for the second read of the policies. Do we have a motion? Beth, second. Candy, thank you. All right, now we have the motion.
Hello, good evening. Whoops. I really don't have anything additional to add this evening to the policies. We already talked about them at first read and in depth, and about the legal need to have the policy as it is. And I think I shared that, in a couple of years, that if we have new administration at the federal level, there probably will be some changes coming forward with the policy. But for us to be in compliance, we need to pass these policies as the regulations have already gone into effect. And I'm sorry, could you repeat who did that? It was.
I think Beth was the first and Candy was the second.
Thank you.
Wow, the mics are really loud tonight. Sorry if I get too close. Questions? Maura.
So I have some concerns about these policies still. They came up at the board meeting last time, and I know that we, in order to receive federal funds, we have to implement the regulations. We have to follow the regulations and make them a part of our policy. There are still ongoing legal challenges over these policies. 18 attorney generals in states across the country have sued USDOE over them, alleging that they offer less protection from sexual harassment and compromise the equality of access to education. So I have concerns about these policies and their alignment with our vision and our mission, specifically that we'll provide a physically and emotionally safe learning environment. And I think these policies are really integral policies to protect our students and our staff. And that we should ensure that they align with our mission and vision, and to look to other districts that may have made changes to the boilerplate or sample policies that the statewide organization of that MSBA and MSMA have provided. So I personally feel that we should shore up the policies. I spoke with Cynthia briefly, and I know that there are some issues with referring this back to the policy committee. I intended to ask the board to refer this back to the policy committee, but I understand there's some challenges with that, and that we wouldn't potentially be able to come back to it for some time. So I hesitate to do that, even though I have concerns about it. I don't know if you want to say anything with regard to that, Cynthia. Maybe that would be helpful. So that's how those are my takeaways about this policy and my concerns, but I would be interested to hear what the board thinks we should do, given the unique nature of the circumstances around this.
I guess if you want my opinion, and I also have consulted twice this week with the lawyers, and we have shared an email back and forth that we a couple of times this week. So the recommendation is very strongly to go ahead and get these policies passed, because we have to follow these regulations. If there's concerns about certain areas, it doesn't mean that we can't discuss them or set up times or committee or any of the above to talk through them. I can say that probably, like I said when I started, that there probably, depending on what happens in 3 weeks from now, there'll probably be some regulation changes or back, what do they say? They back up what was passed, right? And so we really need a process in place that's clear, and we need a clear roadmap, which these do provide, even though, to acknowledge, Mara's concerns, we could look at certain sections and so forth, but, and I did share this with Mara already, so my recommendation is that we pass these. We legally have to follow it. We really need a roadmap, particularly for all the administrators, including myself, who need to follow the process and procedures when these cases come up. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that yet this year, which is unusual. Usually it starts within a couple of weeks. So that's my recommendation, although I hear exactly what Mara has shared. My feeling is things will probably, change, but it won't be in this year. It takes a couple of years for things to change. And I think there's some other districts that have done some things that may not really necessarily line up if they've already done them prior to the regulations coming out. I may not have answers for you if you're asking me questions specific to the regulations, but I'll try.
Maddie.
So when we had our policy meeting, when we reviewed the new policies, I brought significant concerns, and we had our attorney there who instructed us that there was no wiggle room. We had to implement these policies. So I'm grateful to Maura for having gone through whatever exercise she went through to determine that, in fact, other school boards did find some wiggle room. And I'm concerned that there's been a back and forth between the district and our attorney that the policy committee has not been privy to. So I don't know what the reason would be why I understand we have to follow the process, the new legal process, but I'm not sure why we couldn't push forward our policy review agenda in order for the policy committee to perhaps meet with Melissa again, have some time to review what Portland has done or what other districts have done, and reconsider if we have some leeway. I'm not comfortable just sort of towing the line and knowing that we're going to look at it again in 3 years. If we have the opportunity to do this right, I would like to take that time to do so.
May I, Mar, I think you were saying across the country, these, right? Not the state lawsuits? Yes. So it's not that there's districts across the state that are complaining, it's across the country based on the regulations that have been put forward. I think that's what Mara's saying. And then to respond to your point about, so we just got an email yesterday, and I responded, and I talked to the lawyer today. So there was really not a time to communicate back to the policy committee. As I thought we were set to go because it's been 2 weeks, and so we just got this new. I just got the email from Mara yesterday, I think, within the last day. Yeah, okay. That's why you didn't. It wasn't an oversight. It was just happened.
I think what Maura had said about the state was that there were other districts that had written policies that met the requirements of the regulation. I mean, my understanding of most of these regulations is that's the minimum, right? Like the minimum you have to do is these 3 things. Mm-hmm. And if we wanted to do 4 things to make them even more restrictive, we could do that because we're following the minimum that they expect of us. And I think that's the question, right? Do we just approve the minimum, which is what the attorneys have said, like this is what you have to do? Or do we want to go above and beyond that to provide additional protections for the staff and the students? Is that fair assessment? Yeah. So, Becky.
I think I want to clarify something that Cynthia said. It doesn't mean that if you approve the policy that you have to wait 3 years to do something different. So,
correct.
I feel like we're putting ourselves at risk by not having the policy in place. I would rather you approve the policy and then immediately start looking to revise the policy. And it doesn't mean you need to wait 3 years. What Cynthia was referring to is that if there happens to be a change in administration at the election, that many times, as we know, new policy at the federal level will go into place, and that may not trickle down for a couple of years.
Correct.
But as far as getting a minimum policy in place, you can do that tonight, and then you can immediately start revising it if that's the will of the board. And that would be my recommendation.
You read my mind. That was exactly what I was going to suggest. Like, get ourselves in compliance as quickly as we can, and then we can look to make it stricter if we want to. Candy.
I really want to echo what Becky and Cynthia said, and that we need to have these policies in place in terms of meeting regulations. And that does not mean that we can't look down the road to add or change a few things. But this needs to be in place now. As the regulations started in the middle of August 14th, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I agree that we need to get it in place now. And then we can look down the road to look at it if there's anything else we want to do.
Vali.
So I would like to amend the motion to basically approve the policy as written, but send it back to policy committee to immediately begin to revise it.
Do we need to say which one, or is it all of them? Because there's 5 that we're approving with this. All of them?
I would specify it would be.
You would, so.
Ask for specification on which one we want to.
I mean, are these regulations relative to all of these policies? Yeah, so we could look at them all globally.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we have an amendment. Do we have a second? Susanna? Okay. Any questions on the amendment, which would basically approve the policies for second read, so that would make them effective immediately, but then ask the policy committee to reconvene on these and revisit to see if there are additional items we want to add on, obviously to stay in compliance, but Lindsay.
Oh, yeah, I'm just wondering, I know we have it mapped out when we look at policies. Mm-hmm. If we pass this amendment, does that mean we can put this on deck for?
So I would say December, January, because we have our agenda already out for this month. They're all important, but, and I think we need to do some homework. I mean, to say in 2 weeks, we have one in 2 weeks, for example, we wouldn't be ready with anything new or samples, or there's not time to prepare for, and I need some more specificity about what areas would need to be looked at and so forth. So perhaps it's convening a few people together to find out exactly what are the specific areas that are our biggest concern, and then do some homework and bring that to the table so that we're ready and prepared to analyze that, because just coming back with the same policies, not knowing where to start, won't be beneficial. So I would say if we get some information together, then by December, January, because I've got October's is coming right up. We already have that agenda, and then November's is already planned. But December and January would be probably a reasonable expectation to find out where exactly we want to look, what area we really want to look into, and then pull some samples or speak to lawyers or all of the above.
Other questions, comments? Okay, so the vote right now is on the amendment. So do we want to amend as Vali stated? So all those in favor of the amendment? None opposed. Okay. So the original motion has been amended Any other discussion on the main motion as amended? Jen?
I guess my only question would be, is in terms of the keeping the lawyers in the loop. I mean, I think that this could really get out of control in terms of, you know, we took a lot of stuff off our plates for this year that was already going, and I feel like this could become something that turns into like something on a humongous plate. So I just think we just need to be cognizant of when there are decisions made by the policy committee on what to look at, that it's pretty like a real tight not timeline, but a tight kind of, not just a global look at every single one with all kinds of changes or additions, and to consult the lawyers along the way too.
Susanna?
Thank you. Just a question on, Cynthia, you'd mentioned about having a group of us come together ahead of time, possibly before a committee, to look at what areas of the policy or sort of shape that discussion a bit. I'm just wondering what the options for that.
I think it could even be, you could send me an email and I could gather all of those and then organize the areas that we could look at. I mean, it could be as simple as that.
Yeah, and I would say, given that there clearly is some interest in this specific policy, just letting the board know when you're planning on reviewing it at the policy committee, because obviously all of our committee meetings are open to not only board members but the public, so people know when you're going to talk about it, and hopefully they can make time in their schedule to be there.
And that would be important to know, just because we have just enough space in that conference room. So if other people are planning to come, it's great to know ahead, because then I need to move the venue or put it on a Zoom.
Zoom's a great idea. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Ready for a vote? Okay. So approval of the consideration and approval of the second read of the policies, with the instruction to send them back to the policy committee for potential revision. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay,
thank you.
Thanks. All right, unfinished business. 12A, discussion of opening of schools in the green level.
Okay, thank you. Before I get into that discussion, I just wanted to give a couple of brief updates that the board, for the public, the board did write and send a letter in support of advocating for the loosening of the DOE guidelines when it comes to music instruction, specifically singing and playing instruments. And that letter was sent to several people, including the governor and the commissioner. I also shared it with the Cumberland County superintendents in case they wanted to share with their boards to write similar type letters. So we'll see where our advocating goes to. Also, the student handbook was disseminated across all the schools. There was work with the nurses, and a letter went out from the nurses about describing when a doctor's note is required and when it's not. And I also wanted to really just do a shout out to the golf team, as Brady did, and also wanted to let the board know that Matt Kemp from the golf team was actually the Class B boys champion and beat out about 60 other golfers for that. So we're hoping to recognize them at the next board meeting. So that's a celebration we all can look forward to. All right, so moving to the topic of whether to stay in the hybrid or move to green. I feel like the first 6 weeks of school has gone really well. The students are wearing their masks, they're eager to learn, they're trying to do the physical spacing, they're washing their hands frequently, and this is just going, I think, really well. Even when we had the positive COVID cases within our district, those precautions, I think, help keep the rest of our students and staff safe. And so now we've had all our classes have returned to school. And so I think this has shown me that we can close down a grade or a class and continue with the learning for the other students. And so I'm thrilled in the 6 weeks that we've been in school that we have not had to go fully remote at any time. We have adjusted to the hybrid model, and we have started exploring as an administrative team, the possibility of going to green. And we've had a lot of discussion, a lot of difficult discussions, and I guess I've realized that I don't feel like we can fully return to a green model at this point pre-K to 12. And some of the main reasons that I reached this conclusion was around maintaining the CDC physically distancing guidelines, especially in grades 6 to 12 when we have 20 or more students in the class. And we have many classes that are at those enrollment numbers. As we can see from Brady, many of our students at that level are already the size of adults. And our classrooms are just not large enough to have all the students in the classroom and maintain the needed 3 feet between kids and the 6 feet between our students and the teachers. And this is the primary reason that I will not be recommending green for those grades. So the guidelines really need to be loosened, or we need to get more creative in our thinking to make that happen 5 days a week. Even at the younger levels, the physically distancing requirements pose the greatest challenge for us if we are to maintain the instructional model that you've heard us talk about so often while we keep our kids safe. And it's important for us to keep our teachers healthy, because without a healthy staff, we're not going to be educating our students. We want to have the space needed in our rooms to bring kids close enough to be able to teach them to read and write, as Emily was talking about, and to continue with our small group instruction. We cannot do this if we return all kids to every classroom. I have checked with the cohort districts, and with the exception of 75, they have chosen to remain in the hybrid model for the same reasons. 75 is having a discussion tomorrow night, much like we're having tonight, so I'm not sure where they'll end up. The 2 districts that I'm aware of that have gone green near us, I did reach out to. Lake Region, they are in green in kindergarten and 1st grade, and it's because they've had so many students go to remote learning that they're able to maintain 6 feet between their students and between students and staff. In Lisbon, they are also in green, and when speaking to the superintendent there, he said they're able to maintain 5 feet between students and between students and staff. All of our administrators have looked at their classes and classrooms, and we're just unable to do that. The subbing crisis remains an issue. We are getting by through having staff sub during their planning periods and dividing classes up to go to adjoining classrooms. The Cumberland County SUPs are organizing a sub fair to try to recruit more subs. We have some long-term absences due to needing to self-quarantine, and this just creates a bigger problem. The data trending in our area of the state is up. York is solidly in yellow with more positive cases, as I'm sure you have read about. Androscoggin County is being closely watched, teetering on the brink of yellow. Freeport has had a recent spike and is up to 30 cases as of October the 7th. The data in Pownell and Durham remain very stable, even as Androscoggin County is being very closely watched. I recognize that, like a snow day, there's no way for me to please everyone, and my recommendation will be a relief to some and frustrating for others. I am recommending what I believe to be a safer option, a new improved model of yellow, or what we might want to call chartreuse, or the hybrid plus. We have had many students that started yesterday returning to a 5-day-a-week model based upon your vote back in August. And that includes those students that really need an academic boost. During the first 6 weeks, we've been focused on assessing and prioritizing the students that need that boost. Bonnie Violet, the Director of Instructional Support, met with each of the principals to determine that the criteria is systemic district-wide. Using that criteria, we began inviting students back. Not all families want that model. Some of them really want to keep their kids in the hybrid. So when they don't accept, we go to the next student on the list. We have looked at what our classrooms can comfortably accommodate while maintaining the CDC recommendations and have asked students back based on those numbers. For some of our classrooms in some of our towns, it will mean all of our students coming back. But for some of our grades, the classroom sizes will preclude us being able to invite all of our kids back. And much like our response to intervention that you've heard about, we're looking at this in 6-week cycles, and then we will reassess and see who is struggling. And so there might be some kids that have caught up, and this goes back to the gap that Valley was talking about, and then other kids might be invited in. At the K-5 level, we sent out a survey within the last couple of days to see if families would prefer the 5 days a week model or whether they would prefer to remain in the hybrid. Based upon those results, we are looking for options at the K-5 level, because we already have our pre-K students back 5 days a week, who want to return to a 5-day-a-week option to do so hopefully by the beginning of November. This will require creative thinking with off-site options on yellow days, possibly partnering with Wolf Neck. I'm in discussions with them, or other possible available space, possibly with community programs. It will not mean that they will all be returning to their typical classroom 5 days a week. I am also recommending that with the latest CARES Act money that we just, Cynthia's trying to send off the application tonight, my recommendation is to order 2 portables, one that would be placed at Durham and one at Moore Street. This would allow us to get more of our students to 5 days a week. And I don't love the idea of portables, but I also don't like COVID. And I think that if this would allow us to get more kids back, it's one I want the board to consider. If we're able to do this option to get more of our kids back, for the families who want it, we know that we could do this through December the 22nd. Then we have other tough decisions to make about, do we have money in our budget to allow us to continue the remote option or not? That's something that I've directed our Director of Finance to look into, and he's starting to look at that. In the interim, as you heard Emily talk about, we're exploring better ways to differentiate. And you heard what she said about this past Friday with our coaches working with our teachers to get better with our at-home practice work. At the 6-12 level, our new improved model commits to more synchronous learning. In speaking to Principal Gulco today, we believe that about half of our classes are currently synchronous. We are thinking of surveying the parents, much like we did at the elementary level, about whether they feel this is the right amount or whether they would prefer all synchronous classes. We're trying to create the right balance for the majority of our families. The remote learning days at this level look far different than they did in March. Our teachers, as you heard Emily say, have been learning. And it's exhausting, and they are working really hard. Last night we had a Q&A with parents, and I'm delighted to say we had about 50 parents that signed on, and they echoed that. They see that we are doing a better job than what we did in March when we had to just go to remote learning, within 2 days. We are trying to provide instruction 5 days a week when possible and get students closer to a typical school year's workload. And we think that by doing this at the 6 to 12 level, that if for any reason we have to go to red, that we'll be better prepared to do that. We're all learning how to utilize technology better. We still have a lot of equipment ordered that we have not been able to deliver to our teachers, but we're doing that as fast as we can. At the middle school level, they do have a technology coach now supporting them as they move to more synchronous learning, and the middle schools have a plan to move to full synchronous learning within the next few weeks. While we all want the pre-COVID days of education to return as soon as possible, I just feel like we do have a lot we should be celebrating. I'm proud of what the staff in RSU 5 have been able to accomplish. A recent letter that the board received asked why we are trying to do more than area districts. I celebrate that we're performing at a higher level and that our students are receiving 10% or more of learning than many other area districts. We are phasing in more kids to 5 days a week, and I celebrate that. We're moving to more synchronous learning, and I celebrate that. So I feel like, no, it's not the same as a year ago, but we have a lot to be proud of. And so I kind of present this hybrid plus model for your consideration, and I would love at least a straw vote of your support for us to continue moving in that area. And since we need to send off the application tonight, I would also love to hear some feedback about the thought about the portable classrooms.
Thank you, Becky. I like your branding of the new hybrid model. Vali.
So thank you so much. That was a very, very thoughtful presentation. And I can tell that you guys have been working super hard to try to accommodate everybody's needs at this difficult time. So I have to say that I was one of the people who were just saying we really need to try to keep moving to green. But I've been really impressed by the way the current protocols have been able to contain the spread of virus when we had those positive cases. So I have to say that I'm leaning towards staying in yellow, and I really appreciate the fact that you're trying to make accommodations for families who need the 5 days, and also that you're working diligently towards doing more synchronous learning at the higher levels so that the kids can cover all the material that needs to be covered, especially for the demanding classes such as AP classes and advanced courses. So thank you for putting this plan together. I personally support it, and when other people have a chance to speak and we come back to the portables, I would like to ask questions about where they will be located. Thank you.
Jen?
I would echo exactly what Volley said. I was, I would love to go to Green. I'm a huge, pusher of going back full time when it's appropriate. And your explanation was spot on. And just to know that you're like continually looking even at how to make the hybrid better. I know a lot of other schools. I have friends that teach in other districts that it's very status quo. It's here's what we're doing, this is what we're doing until we can't do it anymore. And trying to get people back 5 days a week, I think is great. It just sounds like this is a continual work in progress. And, I was surprised, when the student was saying reading the letter tonight, I know that was an assignment. My daughter had that assignment too, and I was kind of surprised that I know a lot of the kids had that same sentiment. And also kind of a shout out to Jeff Dearberg. He did ask his AP U.S. History kids to listen in tonight and to share their comments. So I think it's nice that, they want to get the kids involved as well. So I would be supportive of continuing with the hybrid as well.
And I guess I do want to make you aware that we will have classes based upon what the principals have done in their buildings, where we, at the K through 5 level, that we will have full classes back in. Because with some of our remote learners, we have classes of 15 or less. And so there are certain classrooms where we can accommodate those students, and we want to bring them back.
Beth?
I would definitely support the yellow plus, as you put it that way. The one thing that you said that I had a concern about was that teachers are subbing during their planning period. And I know that that was one of the concerns with the, doing the every other Friday and having limited amount of planning period. How are the teachers doing with that? I mean, are we asking too much of them to not have a planning period, to not have a day where they can catch up on stuff? That's my only concern.
Yes, thank you for that. Of course, this is totally optional, and we do pay them additional money for doing that. And probably the place, I don't know, I'll look to a couple of the principals. Jen, I feel like it's happened a lot at the high school. Do you want to come and speak to that?
Hi, everyone. So it happened a lot during the time that we had students out on quarantine because of the nature of our schedule. We had 11 staff members who had to be quarantined as well. And so the way that we were able to maintain that is that every teacher in the building has a 70-minute prep period, but every other day that prep period is cut in half. Half of it is dedicated for PLC time when they're working collaboratively. So that's kind of up to Charlie and I about when they meet and how they meet, and then the other side of that is a prep period. So what they were able to do was we asked them to cover a class during that PLC time, and then it was up to them if we found a second person to take the other half, or if they wanted to be paid to cover the second portion of that. And so that full period time was optional for them. And then anybody who covered during a full planning time, that was just people who volunteered to do that. We actually didn't even have to tap on the shoulders to ask people. That being said, our staff was just outstanding in those 2 weeks. We couldn't have done it without their support. We had so many people volunteering to help. They just did an amazing job. So, thanks.
Brady.
I can say from experience, because I had one of those classes where the teacher was at home and there was teachers subbing in, and the teacher at home, they would zoom in and then they'd be on the whiteboard, And the teacher subbing in was really only there to supervise, to make sure that everything was going as accordingly. So they weren't really actively involved in actually teaching us. The teacher at home was actually the one doing that. So it's not like it's a very demanding thing they're doing. Like, they can still get their own work done while also supervising the class.
I guess I would say, I think it's a thoughtful approach. I appreciate, every effort and every measurement that's been done. Like, how can we get as many kids safely into the schools as we can? And I applaud that effort, and I'm in favor of the plan. I'm definitely in favor of the survey for the high school kids on what's the right level of synchronous learning. And is there a plan, does it vary based on grade level? If, how many synchronous classes? Because maybe, if it's all the upper class teachers that are doing synchronous, but the freshmen and sophomores aren't, or vice versa. I like the idea of half the classes are synchronous, because some things just don't lend themselves to it very well, and I think that's okay. But trying to maybe set some sort of standard of minimum number of synchronous. I think all synchronous might be hard. Might be a hard day to do that all day long. But I'd be interested to hear what the high school parents have to say. Susanna.
Thank you. Thank you again, Becky, for that, and for Jen. Really nice to hear about the teacher load, and that there's the volunteers of teachers feeling that they have that time to come forward, because the teacher stress is certainly something that I've been wary about as well. So I'm glad to hear that you haven't been tapping people on the shoulders yet. Anyway, so I generally do support the hybrid plus or truce model. Question about the synchronous, and I did hear from students in other districts with whom I was working last spring, some schools that did go all synchronous, and some students really struggling with sitting in front of a computer all day and feeling that there were issues that maybe some classes, they got some part of the education that was slightly different, but there are a lot of other issues that made it very tiring for them. So I think if we did that, I'd be very interested in doing a several-week trial of it, perhaps, just to get that idea, because it is going to feel quite different than being in class, and quite different than just having several synchronous classes. My other concern, which I guess I've voiced repeatedly now, and so I just want to keep it in the background, is for students who are, for whatever reason, if there are students who struggle with the synchronous learning, whether that's childcare minding siblings or whether that's just technology, just that if we do opt to go all synchronous, it's really important that every single student is able to do the full synchronous learning. And if a couple aren't, I don't want it to be a majority vote. So I just want to keep that in the background. So thank you very much.
Maddie.
Thank you, Becky. I'm also relieved that we're not considering going green at this time. I think, echo what Jen was saying, I think it's not the right time. Grateful to hear about the partnerships with Wolfsnack and our own community services for some outdoor learning opportunity. I think that's great. I think I was on that call with those parents, and that was raised, are our kids getting outside as much as they could? And I'd like to see more of that, even as the weather changes. So appreciate those opportunities. I am concerned about our teachers. As you know, I shared that with you earlier today. And I would like the opportunity for us to hear from the teachers. I think it would be helpful for us to survey teachers. I hate to say that, because I know we have surveyed everybody to death often, and teachers may groan when they hear that. So I would advocate for a simple survey, I guess. But it's just so helpful to hear directly from teachers. about things like synchronous learning, about planning time, about, is social distancing working, is mask wearing working, and maybe even some fill in the blank. What could we be doing that you've suggested that we're not yet doing? And I'd hope to do that sooner rather than later. I think it's great we're surveying the parents, but we really, it's critical that we pay attention to our teachers more than ever right now. I know everybody's so appreciative and they're getting plenty of accolades, but we need to do more than just say, God, we couldn't do it without you, you're amazing. We need to, I want to make sure we have every opportunity to hear what their concerns are and address those where we can.
Is your hand up, Jeremy?
Sort of, so.
Well, go ahead, sort of.
Just to kind of, echo Maddie, in terms of recognition for the teachers, and it does sound like it's in place, but let's make sure we're using as much of the CARES Act money as we possibly can to compensate the teachers if they're, because they are putting in this extra time. So just, want to make sure that's part of the plan. And to go way back to the beginning of the conversation, I'm still blown away by the response of all the schools that had kids with positive tests out there. I think we can't celebrate that enough, that we had, at least 3 schools that had positive, with a positive student, and no outbreaks based on that is amazing. That so much of the protocols were put in and followed, and it just, I'm still amazed that happened so well. So just kudos to the teachers and the administrators and the students and the custodians and everybody involved to help with that. Just amazing. So cool. Thank you.
Dwight.
Becky, I want to thank you as well. I was really encouraged and delighted to hear it sounds like we're making real progress, and I want to thank you and the administrators and faculty. I do have a couple questions. Could you tell me about the technology coach? Is that a new position?
It is a new position, and I think I'll have Ray come up and talk about that.
Ray Grogan, middle school principal. In the past few years, we've had a math coach, and our math coach left this summer, and we took that money and hired a technology coach, figuring that was really the focus we're going to be in for the next year or two with that. And we got very fortunate to hire an ex-teacher of ours who's come in, who knows our staff and has technology ability, and really had a great presence and helped both middle schools move forward with that. And his primary focus, we told him initially, is to focus really on getting teachers synchronously teaching, so we can get that up and running, at both middle schools. And then, once we, get it up and running, then it's looking to improve it, and then, also working on other technology skills for teachers. But we really felt that was our biggest need at this point in time, and the change in the math coach, made it so we didn't have to put in a 1-year only or a 3-month only position through the CARES Act, which we probably wouldn't have been able to fill because a quality person wouldn't come for a position until 12/22.
He anticipated my other question. There's no way we can use the money to, all right, is there a need for a technology coach in the school and other places than the middle school?
So we have advertised at the high school, and we've been unable to fill that position. And so we could use the CARES money. We have money in the CARES Act for staffing. If we could find someone, we could do that through December. But it's just, right now finding staff is difficult. But I mean, we keep trying. And I just, yeah, so, I mean, there's money there if we could find one. But we haven't been able to really find one.
And one final comment. I've had the pleasure of teaching in portables. They're not that bad. And I think if it would help in any way, get more than 2.
So I think there was a question by someone back at the Valley, started that. So, so the application is due tonight. It's gone. I think, you know, there would be an opportunity for us to make a revision if it gets accepted. We started talking about this morning, just to let you know. It was, you know, the more you think, the more ideas you come up with. And so right now, we're thinking of having it at Moore Street and then one at Durham. And I think were you wanting the particular location, Valley, or just at what schools were we thinking of?
No, the particular location, I recall from last year because the enrollment was going up at Moore Street, there was a discussion about portable, and I believe the location was going to be on the front lawn where there are currently trees. So,
so I'm going to have Dennis speak to this because I know that I don't, or Julie, or Will, or all 3 of them, because they understand where they're thinking that it would go, but they all agree that even though the idea was late in breaking, that it was a good one.
So we do have approval already from the town to put one at Moore Street. I went to a planning board meeting early on this year to do that. And the thought is to put it, originally we were going to put it off on the grass right off the bus circle. But that is an outdoor classroom now, so we're thinking we're going to move it. If you pull into the Moore Street School, you have the playground off one end of the school. We're going to put it right in front of that area, right behind the school board, if you will, but sideways to the playground. And in Durham, there's talk about, and we haven't done any planning there yet, but there was talk about the garden area in the back. But Will and I haven't really discussed anything yet on that.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. My only concern was when we had the conversation prior to this one was that there would have been maybe some trees cut down to accommodate, but I'm glad that that's not happening.
So it wasn't. Either way, there wasn't.
Either way, it wasn't. Okay. Good. Thank you. I have another question, but this is about the at-home days with the yellow modified plan. What has the thinking been in regards to the at-home days and how to improve them, especially at the elementary level?
So our best thinking right now is to try to get those kids back 5 days a week, and I'll ask either one of the elementary principals to come up, and maybe Emily really has already started talking about this, but if you want to hear from somebody different, we can have Julie or Lisa come up. Or all 3 of them could come up, and they could be the terrific trio.
I knew they were going to start doing rock, paper, scissors back there.
So we're really working, I think, on making the practice work more purposeful. But can you give her more specifics than that?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. The first is we're at the point in the year now where we know our learners a bit better. So one approach is just more personalization. So that means more targeted work. So going from a place where a student might just write for 30 minutes to a focused revision of a piece they wrote the previous day. So that's one entry point. The other has been, or a couple. One is looking at volume. So really how much time, ensuring that kids at all grade levels, that it feels like purposeful, but also a volume of time that feels appropriate. And understanding that means different things for different kids. So some grade levels, a grade level, for example, this afternoon was looking on like how do we create a menu of options in math such that there's some that's must do. So every day, you know, you work on this extension of the lesson, then you're going to do this fluency practice for 5 minutes, and then here's a menu of games you can play. And maybe getting back to the differentiation piece, even the choice of games kids have might be different. So building in some options to ensure that kids are getting a volume of work across that time at home, in addition to the differentiation piece, having it be a bit more purposeful and personalized as from an extension of the in-class day. Anything to add?
Beth.
I just had a question again about the moving towards the synchronous learning in the 6 through 12, and I think maybe if Ray could come back up, when, I'm not sure, but when the 8th grade had to go remote for a week or so, I think, were they doing synchronous at that time? I
Right,
don't know.
could you come up?
Is it all right? And I guess I'm just wondering if there was any feedback from the middle school level as far as their kids sitting for 6 hours at the screen. That's all.
So when we did switch to red in 6th and 8th grade, we looked at it as more of a short-term red as opposed to a long-term red, and we had the kids follow their regular schedule. So they zoomed into all of their classes live, but the expectation was that they weren't going to be on the computer that entire time, that it might be, just the mini lesson, it might be the mini lesson stay for support with that. And at the end of their, if they have an 8 o'clock language arts class, at 9 o'clock when the math class starts, all the kids should have all of their homework done and be done that. So when the day ends at 2:20, they have no homework. Was the goal on that. We did send out parent surveys to the 6th and 8th grade to get feedback on it, and the feedback was very positive about the structure and the time and how that did go.
Okay, that's great. I was just curious if it was like a 6-hour period of time that they're sitting
So it was
in
a
front of the
6-hour
computer.
period of time, but it wasn't 6 hours in Zoom, and that's a lot what our home day is too. It's, they're logging into their classes on time, but some days it might be just a check-in. Do you understand what your Google assignment is? Other days it might be the mini lesson. Other days it might be the whole time doing a lab or an activity. So it varies, with the goal of being somewhere around 3 hours or so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Vali.
Yeah, and that is precisely the synchronous learning model that other schools were using back in the spring. So even when they say full-time synchronous, it doesn't mean full-time on Zoom. It means what Ray just explained. And also I wanted to circle back to the comment about the full synchronous in the hybrid model. It wouldn't be every day. So to Susanna's question about is it too much, is it too little, just a reminder that every other day they are in school. So it's not the same experience that your students, the ones that you talked to in the spring, referred to. They were doing full-time synchronous, but in our case, they would be doing half-time synchronous. And within those synchronous days, it's only half the time that they're in Zoom. So
Half of a half day, half of a half time. Lindsay.
I would just say a couple of things. Hybrid Plus is so much better. It's been amazing to watch, and I feel like I've seen several iterations of it. In the sense that we had spring and then summer, and then we started hybrid, and then I had a child pulled for quarantine. And I want to even say that while that's not ideal at all, it does teach our students flexibility and appreciation, and I think those are things that are global, learning to roll with things, and then appreciation. I could even extrapolate that and say our environment desperately needs people who have gratitude for small things. And so to watch my young person, my high schooler, he really did not like freshman year at all. And so he was kind of like, I hate freshman year. I'm like, look what you did. So in our house, we joke and say, it's all his fault that COVID happened. But then hybrid started, and he's like, Mom, it stinks. And then he got pulled, and he was like a child on Christmas to return today. So I think, to Jeremy's point, kudos to everyone for stopping it in its tracks. And it's not ideal for those of us whose families are healthy, who have to pull healthy children. But I think for children to learn gratitude, with some of these bumps is an amazing silver lining. And then I want to echo what Dwight said and just say that in Australia, their grounds, my children's public school, was beautiful. It was a beautiful campus, but they were a city school and their population was booming, and they called them demountables. We love all their language. They loved them. So I would echo Dwight. I would say, I mean, if you need even more than 2, if it helps get students back, my kids have been educated in demountables, and it's just a nice extra space. So yeah, gratitude to everyone, and not a bad thing to have our children learning gratitude for normalcy. Thank you.
Susanna.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. One, just the clarification I believe Dwight mentioned about the technology teacher in the high school. Using the CARES Act, that teacher could only be employed through the 22nd of December. Is that correct? Or can we use that money and say, here's a year's worth of salary?
We can only use the money through December for the salaries.
Okay, thank you. Because obviously that makes it more challenging to hire somebody for 2 months or something.
Yes, we did. Well, but I will say at the high school, we've had Lisa Hogan, so that's in the regular budget. And Jen, do you want to just talk about the challenge?
So we have, Lisa Hogan was an amazing member of our staff, and she was a combination of a tech integrator, but also an instructional coach. At first, we were trying to find another Lisa, which is incredibly hard to find that deep technology knowledge plus classroom instruction and coaching experience. We then shifted that description to be a 1-year technology integrator. I'm happy to say we have 1 applicant today. And so, we're looking for somebody who can have a real kind of specific niche of helping teachers in the classroom. But that is a full salaried position, but it's only a 1 year, because we are hoping to really find somebody who can do that instructional coaching plus technology if we advertise early or next year. One other good thing that we did do was, with Dr. Foley's support, is that we put out a job posting for students. So we have 1 applicant for that too. And so it's just an assistant to the technology department, and it would be a paid position instead of giving work study credit or something like that. So so hopefully that's going to be just one more kind of set of hands and support, and that would hopefully be for the year.
Thank you. That was nice to know how that's working. I'm also, in reference to what Ray was talking about and Jeremy and Volley on the fully synchronous learning, I'm glad to hear, because the students with whom I was speaking in the spring were expected to log on at 8 in the morning, and they were logging off at 3 in the afternoon or whatever, and they were expected to be in front of their computer the entire day. So hearing that what we're thinking for synchronous learning, I guess that had been my expectation. So hearing that it's just check-ins, and it's not necessarily that you are sitting in front of your computer for 7 or 8 hours, and even if you're doing your own work, you're still expected to be in front of the screen. So I'm really glad to hear how that not only was going, but how that's been presented. And I guess finally on the portables, I spent 2 years, I guess, of my schooling in portables partially, and was in full support of that as a method of getting people back. So thank you.
Brady.
Just some notes on like the fully synchronous learning. Like, one disadvantage of that is it really tethers the teachers to be inside the school where the Wi-Fi actually works. So it makes it a lot harder for them to bring their classes outside during the day, and it really limits them because they have to stay inside in order to contact the students who are at home during that time. And then another note I had on that was at the high school, at least, I have friends who have 4 Zoom classes the whole day, and they're sitting in front of their laptop the entire day, the entire time. I have one day where I have 3 Zoom classes the entire day, And like, it's not like at the middle school, which my dad said, where it's like you check in and then you sign off and do your own work and your laptop's down. It's you're sitting in front of the Zoom call the entire time. The expectation is your camera is on and you're looking into the camera the entire day. And that can be really tiring mentally and physically and just during the entire day, and it's just a lot to deal with. And then even when your classes aren't synchronous, you're still given work online. So it's not like during that time you're not sitting in front of your laptop. You're still writing stuff on your laptop, doing things all on your laptop, because the way this year is, it's a lot hard to give students physical copies of things. So a lot of things are being given digitally. So that's still sitting in front of your laptop and looking at the screen for like the entire day.
Yeah, I think, the concept of fully synchronous sounds great, right? The idea of, nobody's missing any content conversations. It's very seamless day to day. There's no, teaching one group this lesson and the next day, the next group, the same lesson. But, the specifics I think are very real in the impact it has on the kids. The feedback I've heard in my household is that, I don't think I get any more content from my synchronous classes than my non-synchronous, because half of my synchronous class, whether I'm the half in the class or the half at home, half of it is being taught to the other group. It's not like the teacher is teaching the whole group the same lesson. It's like talking to the kids in the class. Now I'm talking to the kids on the computer, and now I'm talking to the kids in the class, and it's not seamless. And I know a lot of that is just learning curve, right? I mean, there's going to be improvements to all of that. But I do think that those are definite realities that we have to take into account when we're setting the expectations of, 4 Zooms in a day. That's a lot. Maddie.
Yeah, just going on that thought. I'm a huge proponent of synchronous learning just because I think that's the future and we've got to figure it out. But to Brady's points, that's my daughter's experience as well, and it's headache fatigue it's a real problem. So I think it's not synchronous versus anti-synchronous. It's how do we evolve synchronous learning so that it works.
Maura, just so.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thank you so much, Becky. I just had a few questions. So the portable classrooms, will any of that have to come out of our budget, or will the CARES Act cover it, even though we will have them presumably beyond December 22nd?
Yes, we would need to have them on site by the end of December, and that would be our plan in checking today.
Great. And then I know we had at least one parent contact us about additional tech tools on laptops for parents to be able to monitor students. Is there anything that we're able to do with regard to that, given the increased synchronous learning and increased laptop time?
I do not have any update on that, but I can definitely look into it. It's, from my email, we've had a transition, so I'm happy to check on that and provide an update.
Thank you. And then I was also wondering, I know you mentioned for the K through 5 offsite options. I was wondering if you might be exploring anything like that for 6 through 12. I know that may be more challenging with the synchronous learning, but it could be another option.
We are not exploring that currently with 6 through 12 because the reason that I started exploring that K through 5 is we were able to run the numbers to say, well, how many kids can we get in a classroom, and then how many kids would that leave? And so through finding that number out, that's what made me think that it might be attainable. At the 6 through 12 level, I think that would be more challenging, but we can explore it.
And I want to thank you for your creativity and all the thought that you and all the administrators have put into the hybrid plus chartreuse. I fully support it. I do know, I'm sure we have folks in our community who are probably wondering about green, so I hesitate to even go there because I know you've put so much thought into this a hybrid plus, but what would it take for us to move to green in the future? Is that, I know you've given us an idea of that in the past, but has that changed?
Well, I think at the 6 to 12 level, it would have to be probably some type of loosening of the guidelines, or a lot of kids moving to remote learning. I think at the K to 5 level, you know, I mean, with the portables, we might be there. It's just going to look, it's not going to be your typical green model.
Thank you.
I did check with, I think, Emily and Julie and Will, and I haven't had a chance to check in with Lisa, and I think it's because it's going to be, I feel comfortable saying, unless she starts shaking her head no, that I think at Pownell we'll be able to give every family who wants to go green at the K to 5 level the green option. Will, on his survey, and they have until I think Friday, his numbers are running that 75% of his families would like a 5-day-a-week option. Is that still holding, Will? So that is holding right now. So in talking to him today, if we can figure out the staffing, if we had the portable, I think that we could accommodate every family that wanted a 5-day-a-week learning experience. Is that correct, Will? Probably. He is kind of avoiding it.
I wish I had the option to shake my head like Lisa has. So it varies because you know, the survey we put out across the K5 was very limited. It was really just like 5-day hybrid remote. From that, just to get a sense of like, all right, how much more do we explore this option? So we've had several people email just to say, I'd love 5 days, but not if it risks us tipping into red, in which case I want yellow. So, or I'm interested in 5 days, but I'm not quite sure what it means. So we've also had families say, you know, if my child is in middle school and I have a child in elementary, not having them on the same schedule would be tricky for us. So I want 5 days for everyone, not just synchronous. So those numbers are 75%, but I think there's a fair amount of nuance built into it that will take a bit more unpacking.
And then in Freeport, the numbers are running about 60% of our families wanting the 5-day option. So we don't know what that will put off for numbers, but I feel like we're very close to being able at the elementary level, if we can figure out the staffing and with the portables, that we'll be able to provide that.
And all of that is without the continued research into Wolf's Neck or community programs. That's just our existing spaces plus the portables.
Well, it might mean partnering with either community programs or Wolf Neck. That might be the alternative experience.
Okay, you lost me. So,
you know, part of when we brainstormed the idea, it wouldn't necessarily be that we're creating all these different classrooms, right? I don't want you to think that we're adding a 3rd grade classroom and a 4th grade classroom and a 5th grade classroom and we're dividing up classes. We're just trying to create an experience for all of our kids who need it, that they would have a 5-day-a-week option. And so those, you know, if we have 10 kids in 4th grade at Durham that we can't fit into our classrooms, it could be that with the portable, that we have the portable and those 10 kids on their normal hybrid days when they would be home, that they might be in the portable receiving some type of alternative experience that might be more like an enrichment experience, or it's just going to look a little bit different.
How does that work from sort of an equity standpoint, that you have kids that are in the class getting different instruction every day, as opposed to right now? I mean, I know there's a handful of kids that are in there 5 days, but the majority of kids are 2 and 2 with the floater other day. But if you've got the majority of the kids are in the class 5 days, and then there's just a handful that there's not room for, that are essentially getting just oversight, not any learning, right? They're just, they're getting their home packets like what they would do at home? No.
No, I would call it a different learning experience, but it would be more than home packets. It is not meant to be babysitting.
Okay.
But, you know, with Wolf Neck, we've talked about a very kind of science, even though it's all preliminary, it would be very science focused.
Valley.
So some of the students would be going to school in a traditional model 5 days a week with in-person instruction, and others who also need 5-day something, maybe going to school on the hybrid model every other day, but the days that they would be at home, they would be having this alternative experience. So how do we manage the different amount of new learning that the kids get? If some are 5 days getting regular instruction and others are getting regular instruction only 2 or 3 days, including the ones who choose to continue with the hybrid model. And this is not to criticize. I think it's great that you're exploring all these options. And I am so grateful that you're trying to bring kids in 5 days a week, those who need them, even if it doesn't mean full in-person instruction, regular instruction every day. I'm just trying to understand how will this work. But I'm very, very supportive of all these creative ideas, and I really love the idea of Wolf's Neck Farm and all the other things that you brought to the table.
So I think we've always said that equity doesn't mean like it's exactly the same, right? And that's whether we're educating in COVID times or non-COVID times. So this would be similar to that. It's just, it's going to look different. We're going to have to decide on the criteria. We have families already that we're inviting back 5 days a week. There are some that don't want it. They don't want that exposure. And so it is, you know, we don't have every detail figured out, but obviously these would have to be families that elect to do that. And so so this was a very preliminary brainstorm that we did, I think, on Friday when the principals were exhausted, but they still were able to talk it out and talk about the possibilities. And for example, if we went with the Wolf Neck partnership, if the numbers worked out to do that, they would be having a outdoor kind of science focused on the farm half the day, and then, you know, the other half the day they might be having lunch back at our buildings, and then there could be possibly some type of like guided study where they're, you know, working on some of the work that they missed on that day, and or some type of other, you know, activity. So that's what our preliminary thinking was about. It doesn't mean that's where we'll end up, but obviously the families would have to elect into that and know that their student might be having a little additional homework that night, and that we would be asking families where we thought that, the students could handle that.
So, so what I'm reading from what you're saying is that in the classroom, in the regular classroom, the teachers would still be teaching under the hybrid model. So the students who go to school in person 5 days a week, they wouldn't necessarily be getting a new mini lesson every day. They would be basically getting what the kids who go 5 days a week currently get, which is the same mini lesson 2 days in a row, because you have A group, B group for one lesson, and then you go back to A group, B group for the second lesson, and then so on and so forth. So it's not that the kids who are not in the classroom every day would be missing a new lesson by not being in the classroom.
If we have our students, the majority of our students back, they might be missing some lessons, because we would not be running a 5-day-a-week model where, let's just say a classroom is 18 students and there are only 3 students that are missing. We wouldn't be just doing repetition. Right now, I know there have been earlier questions about, you voted, and I still thank you for that vote, to allow our staff members to bring their kids back. Those kids are not necessarily receiving a new lesson. But in this model of Hybrid Plus, we would be providing, new learning as we normally did a year ago. And there would be some students who would be missing that, but we would feel that, we could help them with whatever the alternative program was, to be able to provide that.
Okay, and
I mean, obviously, we do not have all of the details worked out, but what we're trying to do is get our pre-K to 5 back for all families who need it and want it, to some type of 5-day-a-week experience. That's our goal.
Well, that's great, and I have to say that even though there's always room for criticism no matter what you do, I do believe that you shouldn't just not progress because not everyone can benefit from the same experience. So to the extent that you can just keep moving in the direction of offering more for the most number of students, I wouldn't want you guys to stop, because you can't offer everybody exactly the same thing. So I appreciate that. You're taking a risk, and you're, in a way, exposing yourself to criticism, but I support your courage.
Maddie.
Yeah, I support it hugely, because some of the most interesting pieces that I've read about what education is facing in these times is the need to transform. Where there's that model with the, you reach that like tension point, and like everything has to change. And this conversation kind of highlights the tension that public education will go through. Like we're accustomed to testing and benchmarks and growth targets, and that may not work as effectively in a model where we have got to start thinking about learning in some of the ways that some private institutions have been taking on learning, over past decades. And yeah, you're right, we'll get criticized for it potentially, but I think it is important for us to start to imagine how learning might look really different, so that we can be nimble regardless of what comes down the pike in terms of the next pandemic and the next challenge to education. So I think it's exciting, and I'm glad that you're exploring it.
And you will get applauded too. It won't be just criticism. A lot of people will be very excited, and they will be encouraging you. So,
Brady.
I just kind of want to bring it back to when we brought up the statistics of like families that wanted to bring their kids back to 5-day. I think another important thing we should look at is asking teachers what their opinion is, and if they feel comfortable being in a classroom with all their kids going 5-day, because it shouldn't be just up to the parents, and we should be asking for their consideration because they're the ones on the front lines actually having to be there and doing it. So that should be an important thing we should learn. And then another thing, talking about the kids who are in the yellow and the kids who are in 5-day, I just have some concerns. If they're in the same class, it feels like either one is going to be getting the same lesson 2 days in a row, or one is going to be missing a lesson and getting behind, because it feels like they're going to be getting different educations. So like one possibility could be making one class synchronous and one class 5-day. That way you don't have that overlap, so then they're not clashing and doing different things at the same time. So you're not trying to manage your kid at 5-day and then giving half your class stuff to do at home and then giving half your class stuff to do that the next day. That might be a little bit easier for teachers.
I was having that same thought, Brady, about just the juggling act for the teachers around what that could look like if you did have a mix of parents who chose to stay in yellow, parents who said, yes, I want to come back 5 days, and parents who'd like to come back 5, but there's no space, so they're doing some sort of alternative on their other 2 days. I mean, that's 3 different potential models that you've got to manage. So that was my thought too on there. Susanna?
Yeah, second, definitely want to hear from teachers about that and don't want that left out. But just a question on opportunities such as Wolf Neck Farm, and I'm a massive supporter of that, and I think that don't want to understate the education that people get from that type of opportunity, and that it might be different than in the classroom, and students doing that might have more homework to be in the sort of classroom academics, but having that chance to be on the farm, to have that science focus or whatever the focus is going to be, is a massive learning opportunity. And I want it to be seen, really framed, and I think Becky, when talking about as an enrichment thing, that it is education, it is real world education, and these students are going to gain so much from it. It's not just, oh, well, you want to be in school, but you can't, so here, go to the farm. I mean, that's not what it is. So, it's something that I really do want to support, and I think that framing it as what it is education, is really beneficial. But a question on it, and I was just wondering, and this may be something that's not fully thought through, although I think probably is, transportation for those opportunities. Is the adding, and I know we've spoken about the buses and how that's gone really well and that we can fit more students on the buses, but if you're talking about taking buses in other directions, is transportation something that is going to be a hiccup, or is that going to be underway?
Well, it's always a hiccup, isn't it, Dennis? Sometimes it's more than a hiccup, but I think that we would figure that out. I mean, it's one of the nice things is it's right in our community, so it's not as if we're, having to travel like an hour away. But no, we're not that far into the details. We did add, I think our fleet's going to be up to 24. And so, and we're still advertising for bus drivers, so anybody wanting to drive a bus, that would be great. But I think we should be able to figure that out. As you know, our field trips have been way reduced. We are not, this is a district that believes in field work in normal times, and we were in previous years running field trips all the time. So I feel confident that we'll figure this out.
I think the survey to the parents, to Will's point of there being some question, like nuance. Well, if you mean this, then that. But if you mean that, then I want this. I think you might see those numbers change if you explain what's being offered. If people just assumed, would you go 5 days, similar to what the teachers or the staff students are encountering, which is more, it's the hybrid model, but with some oversight so that the teachers can be in the classrooms. you know, parents might be like, I'll just keep them home because you know, I'm working from home, as opposed to you would get 5 days of instruction. You might get more interest in that. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe people feel comfortable with just the smaller, you know, exposure days for their kids. But I think you might see some movement in those numbers when you sort of lay out what the plan is. So, I mean, I don't know if people are bound and, you know, signed in blood which way they went, but I think you might see, and I don't know, I imagine it probably only increases the people that are interested. So, might more people for the farm, but I think they're all great ideas. I actually heard an article once from NPR about this guy, this psychiatrist or sociologist or somebody, some professional, who had written a whole thing about how he felt that middle school kids should all not go to school for those 2 years in middle school and just go live on a farm and like learn how to live, and their brains would do better. So maybe that's what we're starting here. Jen?
I just want to kind of bring it back around and, you know, go back to what Becky asked, which was like our kind of straw poll vote about the hybrid. I think we have tons of good ideas and questions for Becky, and I think she's kind of given us the info that she has, and we'll probably get more info at, you know, all the subsequent meetings about what's moving. So I don't know what the official term is, but I'd like to do the vote.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have a vote on the agenda, so I guess do you want to separate the portables, or are you just okay saying, you know, just in general? I guess I would be interested. I didn't hear anybody who seemed opposed to the plan or as she laid it out. So I think. Do you want to?
I guess I'd like it separate. I don't think it has to be an official vote, but I just, you know, we do need to move on. Well, so I'd like a vote on like moving to the hybrid plus, and just your vote of support on that. And then I would like a separate just straw vote on, you know, if we're okay with purchasing the portables, because I'm hearing that the plan that Cynthia submitted, that many of the plans are being approved in a couple of days, and then Dennis was in discussion with the person that we would be buying the portable from, and I just feel like a lot of schools are doing this, so you know, we need to, yeah, I just need to know.
Okay, so we will do 2 quick votes. We don't need a motion or a second because it's not an official vote. It's just a straw poll. The first is, I'll wait for Maddie to come back. I want your vote to count. The first is support for the hybrid plus model as laid out this evening. So all those in favor of moving forward with that model? Opposed? And the second vote on, I feel like we really need to call, what's they're called, demountables? Way better than portables. I'm only in favor if we start calling them those. All those in favor of the demountables? Okay, and none opposed. Great. Good. Okay, so the remaining items we have are all around the MSMA conference. So that conference you have in your folders. We didn't get the actual little blurb thing prior to the submission, prior to the agenda going out, but Ginny sent it out and included it in everybody's folders, which is just the keynote speaker and then the list of the clinics. The only thing that I want to point out to people this year is that it's not a Thursday and a Friday, it's a Friday and a Saturday, including Halloween. I don't know, that's the way they chose to go this year.
But everything will be online, so you can watch anything you want until November 8th.
That's right, I was going to say, the other piece is you'll have access to all, which actually I think is fantastic, because there's always 2 that I want to go to at the same time. So now you can watch them at your leisure up until November 8th. And if you are interested in getting registered, you just need to let Ginny know by the 19th, and she'll get you registered. And we always highly encourage both new board members, veteran board members. There's always something to be learned at these sessions, I found. So if you're interested, what's that? And our student, yes, Brady and Liam are both welcome to register, and if you're interested. So yes, so the 19th. Is that Monday? Somewhere, Monday, Tuesday of next week, she needs to know. Yes?
Some of the sessions are live, though. When you read the details of the clinics, all of the A and B offerings are live, and the others are pre-recorded. So like if you wanted to meet the commissioner on Friday at 11:10 and you wanted to actually ask her a question, you might want to be there live.
But they're all going to be available. I think they're recording them all, so you can see them all later. But yes, if you if you're wondering why they're ignoring you in the C session, it's because it was taped. Yeah, so just let Ginny know by next week if you're interested in being registered, and she will get everybody signed up. The next thing we have on here is the resolutions. So we have received those, and they are the pink sheet in your packages. And there's actually only 4 of them this year. Well, I feel like usually there's more. Sometimes they add more on the floor, but these are the 4 that they have provided so far. You can certainly see the theme of where they're coming from on these guys. And so typically what we've done in the past few years is for new board members, how it works is there's a delegate from each district that's voted on by their sending district as the delegate for them. And they have a delegate assembly. One of the sessions at the conference is the delegate assembly, which everyone is welcome to go to, but only delegates are allowed to speak and vote. And the things they vote on are like the members of the MSBA board. Sometimes they'll have changes to the charter. I don't think they have any this year. And then they'll vote on these proposed resolutions. So what these resolutions are is they have a committee that creates these each year, and it really sets the goals for the MSBA for the upcoming year. Like, what do they want to advocate for? What do they want to support? And so as the delegates, each district gets a vote on whether they feel like these are appropriate uses of the time and resources for the MSBA. So hopefully folks had an opportunity to read through these ahead of time. And so what we have generally done is next, actually after we discuss these, we'll select a delegate and an alternate. But what we've done is we've talked about the resolutions, and as a board decided whether we are in support or not of the individual resolutions, and then any direction we want to provide to the delegate, if we want them to get up and ask a question, if we want them to get up and make a comment, when they're representing RSU 5 at the delegate assembly. So the first one is the development of a distant learning plan. So basically what it sounds like is they'd like the association, they want to call for a plan to address the professional development needs for teachers, assessment of devices, high quality connectivity for all parts of the state, online curriculum to help support all the age groups, and really moving towards more use of online learning, not as just a emergency mechanism, but a way to use it more intentionally in the curriculum. So, and that the funding for such online learning would be included in the funding formula from the DOE. So that is the first resolution. Anyone have any thoughts or comments? Maddie?
I'm generally in favor of that. I just underlined that line about funding being part of the formula and exactly what that would look like.
Yeah, I don't know if they know the answer to that yet. I mean, I think, you know, how the funding formula works is the state identifies things that they're willing to fund, right? Like they're willing to fund so many teachers per so many students. They're willing to fund buses to a certain level, you know. So I think what they're trying to say is that, you know, online learning would be a, you know, reimbursable item that they would include when they're determining what's the minimum amount it costs to educate your students. So I think it would be an add there. Yeah, Valerie?
So I would be in favor as long as that funding isn't, I would be in favor as long as this is new funding and not funding that's taken from other areas that we currently receive money from. So I don't want anything to do with just shifting money around, but if it's adding new money, then yes.
Beth?
I would be in support of that as well. And, you know, I think it's great. I mean, the biggest challenge that I can see in this is actually getting the high-speed internet to every area of this state. My husband works for the phone company and installs internet. And he goes down these long peninsulas on the mid-coast, and, you know, they just don't go down there. So it's just, you know, there's a lot of, in a rural state, that's going to be a huge challenge, and it's only going to probably get there with legislation, which I know that that's what they do, is try to do that. But anyway, totally support. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's almost even like federal legislation at this point, trying to get the broadband, you know, into the rural states. So I think it's aspirational for sure. But okay, anybody? We'll do similar straw polls for these just to make sure that we're providing the right. I feel like we should do the delegate first. Sorry to throw that in there. I just feel like whoever's the delegate might have additional questions and clarifying questions about the feedback we want them to provide. Are you guys okay switching the order? Okay, good. So do we have any volunteers to be the delegate? So I didn't check to see. It's usually the first day of the, yeah, okay, so it's on Friday. It's from 3:30 to 5:30 is the delegate assembly. So that's the only one you really have to be at live because you need to vote. So whoever is the delegate for that would need to be able, you know, obviously emergencies happen, but plan on being there for that delegate assembly. Say that one more time.
I said I enjoyed it last year, but I'll happily pass the torch.
Laura?
Yep, I'd be willing to do it if there's no one else wants to.
You have to be there anyway, right? Because you're being voted on.
I think I do, yeah.
Okay. So, Maura, anyone else interested? Because we also need an alternate. So, if she's unable to fulfill her duties as assembly delegate. Susanna?
I'd be interested in being the alternate. I'm not quite I think there was some issue that I had scheduling wise, and I think I could do that time, but I'd be very interested more on the alternate position.
Great. So, so do we have a motion for consideration and approval of Maura as the delegate and Susanna as the alternate to the Maine School Boards Association Annual Delegate Assembly at the annual fall conference? Thank you, Beth. Second, Lindsay. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? No, great. Okay. Back to the program already in progress here. Okay, so the development of the distance learning plan. So we'll do just a straw vote on that. And then Maura, if you need any additional clarity, definitely ask. All those in favor of the first resolution? No one opposed, great, thank you. Okay. Number 2, building stronger family support for education. This one is more around greater involvement by parents trying to encourage greater involvement by parents and guardians, particularly at the early learning stage at home, because it creates better outcomes for the kids over time. It says the ultimate goal is to identify the needs of both adults and children in the household and connect them with the appropriate services and learning opportunities. Maddie.
So I'm wondering if Becky might have a perspective on this through Bonnie or somebody, because my first thought is, yeah, great idea, but now we're social workers too? That's, you know, and we're relatively well funded compared to other districts in the state. So it sounds like a huge heavy lift.
Yeah, well, to me, it's written in a way I don't really know what it means, right? I mean, conceptually, of course, we all believe in that. But when I read outreach to and support of those who care for children in the home or essential first steps in creating a successful partnership between caregivers and schools, I mean, this is where I think policy can get tricky, right? Like, what does that really mean? And I agree, if they mean that it's going to fall upon the school to start reaching out to families at birth, I mean, that's a heavy lift, right? And that's when you start building the partnership. And so this is one of those that if it's an unfunded mandate, it would scare me a lot. But of course, I agree that building, you know, family support, that we can't educate kids well without the support of the families.
And I read this to mean that, I mean, they're talking about before the kids are even in school, right? This is like before school age. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, seems to be an overstep in my opinion. Lindsay.
Jen. So I was reading this and I feel like there's already stuff in place. I mean, we have Head Start programs, and then I know that, I don't know what it falls under, but children who have special, you know, and special education prior to going to school, there's, you know, I feel like this is like a federal thing.
Well, we have CDS, but that doesn't fall on the public schools.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Right,
I
exactly.
think it should stay where it is.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think we should add it at all. I agree with Maddie. I mean, this is just adding a huge additional piece to something that we're still striving to do with students that we have in school.
And the push for us to try to take over the CDS role, and you know, schools are saying there are space issues, there are staffing issues, and so far it hasn't happened for that reason.
Lindsay.
I agree completely. I mean, my note is, wow, big ask, especially right now. I mean, it's ludicrous given everything. It's nuts. I believe in it. It's true, but not this year.
Maddie.
I'm always curious what the politics are behind this, and this one it's really hard to figure it out. I just know DHHS has been suffering in our state, hugely underfunded, major problems. I'm wondering if this is an attempt to shift that over to the DOE, and yeah, if so, I'm way against it, of course.
Polly.
So I don't know if it's appropriate to ask the delegates to convey the message to MSMA that when they do write these resolutions, they need to provide more detail. Because even with the prior one that I voted for, I don't understand with whom they will partner to do all the work that they're saying that they will do. And in this one, the second one, I don't even understand who's going to do this, or how, or when. So it's really difficult to decide whether to support or not a resolution unless there's more detail and they're more fleshed out. But I echo what everyone said. This is, for me, too ambiguous, and yeah, taking over a huge amount of additional work to what we already have, and those are pretty full plates.
Brady.
One important specification that we might want to get is when in the last sentence it says connect them to appropriate services and learning opportunities. That's just really vague, and it doesn't specify what exactly the goal is and like how we're trying to help them. Like it says we want to help them, but then it kind of just ends and it doesn't say how they plan on us helping them. So I think some specification there might help us understand what this is actually trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. The thing that pops out at me, and maybe because it's our name that's in there, but school boards should be working with their facilitator or their administrators to facilitate the engagement. Us? Really? Okay. So, yeah, I think I whenever I read these, I always wonder, like, what was the origin of this? What were they trying to accomplish? And how did they have to water it down to get it past somebody to get on here? But maybe Maura will learn more at the meeting. But in the meantime, any other comments on that one? Ready for a vote? All those in favor of the resolution building stronger family support for education? Opposed? Okay. All right, number 3, equity in education. So all students, regardless of race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ancestry, original, national origin, or disability, deserve equitable opportunities to learn in the Maine public schools. So this one seems to be towards creating an opportunity for recognizing bias, whether it's training, for the staff, for the boards, in the schools in general. I think it's, also probably lacks a little bit of specificity, but I think we, can certainly get the gist of where they're going with this one. But
I think with our equity and inclusion audit, we are doing that. We're funding it ourselves, but for districts that are not as wealthy as we are, or communities that are not as supportive as they are, the question again is this a funded or unfunded mandate? So in principle, yes, we're doing it. It doesn't really affect us, but for rural districts that may not have the funds, how are they going to accomplish this?
yeah, and I'm not sure what they're gaining it, like what, I don't know, maybe they're going to look for legislation that requires all schools to do this and fund it. I don't know, but it is pretty vague. Maddie?
Again, this is me guessing, but this feels to me like a reaction to national politics around racial equity training, not only in education but in the workplace, and it looks like it might be seeking to protect whatever measures schools might want to go through in the future, regardless of what happens at the national level. So in that case, I'm definitely supportive.
Any other comments on that one? Okay. Oh, Maura.
I would love to see the DOE provide something there so it's not, doesn't all fall to schools. Like, I don't know, whatever it would be. Oops, sorry. I don't know, whatever it would be, some guidance or something, so the work didn't all fall to the district. So I don't know if we can propose like additions or amendments to these, but I don't know, how would I phrase it? Maybe I would say instead of the district leaders should facilitate, maybe add like at the end, and Maine DOE should offer some support or something like that. I don't know.
I would say support and funding.
Yeah, you are definitely able to make amendments on the floor. It's a great time if you've never been. Like, it's very interesting. It's kind of like town meeting. If you've ever been to town meeting, it's kind of like that. Because it's there's people from every district, well, most districts around the state. So you get a very wide variety of representation from different, different parts of the state. So it's very interesting. But you can definitely you can ask for clarifications, you can make comments, and you can make amendments to it. So, Brady.
I guess my biggest question with this is what's actually like holding district leaders to be like responsible and actually do this, and then what happens if they don't follow this? Like, is there any follow-up to that? Because I don't see anything saying that, like, if you don't do, like, if you pass this then don't do it, like, what happens then? Is it just like oopsie?
So the MSBA is kind of it's like a trade organization, I guess, for school boards and superintendents. They're not a rule-making body. They can't require anybody to do anything. They're really here as a member organization to help support schools, right? So a lot of our policies that we get, they work with the DOE and with attorneys to draft so that individual districts don't have to go and figure out how to write all these things. So they provide support to school districts. So nothing that they're putting here is any mandate, just by virtue of them saying it. But what happens is based on this delegate assembly, if the majority of the districts that send delegates vote in favor of these things, they will then push the legislature or they will push the DOE to try to put something in place to accomplish these things. So, does that answer your question? Okay, great. All right. So what are we thinking? I'm thinking, based on Maura's comment, does anybody have any issue with her including, trying to get some support for this, not just from school district leaders, but also from the DOE? Okay. So all those in favor of supporting the equity in education as amended by Maura? Okay, great, thank you. And then the last one, this is an interesting one. I think we're seeing it, even tonight, school board meeting, remote participation. So as you guys may recall, the ability to have meetings via Zoom is only allowed because of the, I would say perpetual state of emergency, but what feels like the perpetual state of emergency since March. And once that goes away, the ability to have public meetings over Zoom would also. So what they're saying here is that what they've seen, and I think is probably similar to what we have seen in the past 6 months, is that we have probably had some more public participation in our meetings that we wouldn't have had otherwise in person. And they would like to see, given the technology has evolved to allow this in a pretty seamless manner, to allow public meetings to include a remote aspect to it. And also it looks like even board members voting via remotely. So
yeah, so my question about the board member part is that will we have meetings, if they follow through with this resolution, where half the board members are in the room and half are joining through Zoom?
I think what they're saying is that, I mean, I don't know, it'll depend on what the language of the law they propose is, or get somebody to propose on their behalf, is, how they write it. But it sounds like, you could vote from home or you could vote in person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm fully in favor of having the public comment via Zoom come in to a live board meeting. I'm not so sure about board members joining via Zoom, because it's a lot more difficult to conduct a meeting with half members present and half members on Zoom. It's kind of distracting. So, I mean, as a board member, I would rather be here than be on Zoom if there are people meeting. But also, if I'm here as a board member, I would find it a lot more difficult to conduct a meeting that flows if half of the people are not here.
Jen?
I would agree with Folly. I would be 100% in favor of still having public comment like we have. I think it's great to have people engaged. I also agree, I don't feel like it would be a real cohesive group if we were kind of split up. I do think it would be a nice option. I know last winter we had to cancel a meeting due to weather. So if we had some option to keep a meeting,
you know, for inclement weather, that would be helpful, just because we wouldn't lose ground on where we go at every meeting.
Beth.
I agree with Valley with the idea of it would be tricky to have the, you know, half of us here and half of us not, but it just makes me think about the teachers that are doing half of the, you know, class in person and then half online. So, I mean, you know, we're all kind of, but I also just wanted to point out that it says, that last sentence says that if the legislation is successful, the decision to use this option should be a local one. So it looks like we would have control over how we could use it or not use it, I think. So I'd be in support of it.
Jeremy, you're good? Okay, Susanna.
I think I agree with what Vali put forward initially, but also with Jen about whether it's inclement weather enabling us to continue to hold the meetings when we otherwise wouldn't, or people who are individually ill or away for whatever reason, that it's acceptable for individuals to call in. I think that's very different than having half the meeting. If it's an option to say, I guess there's a difference to me if somebody's ill and doesn't want to come in because they've got the flu, but still want to participate. That's very different than saying the meeting is optional in person. And I don't know if we can make that distinction and who makes that call that so-and-so is away but is still able to call in. But I do like having the remote option for the engagement of the community.
I would encourage somebody with the flu should just go to bed. You might not be making the best decisions of the night. Dwight.
I've had the pleasure of meeting with Region 10's board, where half the members were in the room and half of them were on Zoom, and it was not a problem. So I love the idea and I love the flexibility.
Manny.
Yeah, in the corporate workplace, back when I first started in HR, they were dead set against work from home, and I didn't understand why. And now it's, you know, it's the latest greatest thing. You know, just 20 years too late. But it's always preferable to have people engaged and in person. Of course, it's always preferable, but it's not always possible. And I think this would help us plan. I honestly think we're headed into pandemic A, B, C, D. You know, we've got to have flexibility. So I'm in support of this.
Brady.
Just a question. Have you guys actually tried doing like half online, half here?
No, no. We have done, I think the most we've done is Becky and I have been in the room together, and everybody else was on Zoom.
So, I mean, if you haven't even tried it yet, it's hard to say that like it's going to fail and it's not going to work and we shouldn't even consider it whatsoever. Let's just vote it down here. Because like I mean, I thought my Zoom classes were going to be so weird and clunky, and now it's just normal and it's how it is and everyone's fine with it. So I think if you haven't tried it yet, I think there's no reason to actually say that you shouldn't do it, because there's no point in not trying it.
I think we did consult with our lawyer on that, didn't we?
We did, because we weren't sure. We knew we could do it remotely and we knew we could do it in person, but what we didn't know is if half the people were remote and half the people were in person. Like, it seemed like there were different rules that applied. So I don't know if we did eventually go ask them or just decide to keep it virtual.
I think their advice to us was that you couldn't really do he would not advise us doing
right.
this split.
Yep. But it could be because of this law that doesn't allow for it, right?
That's
so
correct. So I think currently that's why we're not doing that, Brady. On the advice of our lawyer to either have us all together or not. We have had board members tune in remotely. Candy's done that from the islands.
Assuming she ever gets back to the islands.
But so it's possible to tune in, but we have not allowed them to vote based upon the advice from our lawyer.
Susanna.
Just referring back to the comment made again a moment ago, is that passing this still lets the decision be made for us to veto it if we feel it's not necessary or not in our best interest. So, I mean, I guess I'm in support of passing it and then saying that if we individually don't feel this is appropriate, supporting it doesn't mean that we're adopting the policy. And so
Correct.
I think this discussion of how that works may be premature right now, I guess, that's all.
And I agree, and thank you, Beth, for pointing that out, because I don't think I read it closely enough. But knowing that we control what we want to take from it makes me at ease voting yes for this one.
All right, that sounds like a good segue into you guys ready to vote on this one? Any other comments? Yeah.
So, just to be clear, whatever the vote is, just as is, nothing of concern? Okay, thanks.
All right, all those in favor of board meeting remote participation resolution? Okay, no one opposed. Great. Thank you, guys. And now we are back to public comment. So we definitely don't have anybody left in person. So we'll check the Zoom, see if we've got anybody on Zoom. If you would like to provide a public comment, we just ask that you raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we can get you into the meeting. Give folks a second, because I know there's a little bit of a delay between the live. Nope. Okay. All right. Well, seeing no public comment, I would take a motion to adjourn. Lindsay, Susanna, thank you. All those in favor? None opposed. Great. Have a good night.